Hi everyone, welcome. We have a fantastic opportunity here to chat and see wherever we end up with Verity-Jane Keefe. I'm Gavin Wade. I'm artist curator here at Eastside Projects. My pronouns are he, him, and are we doing visuals? I am a white man with shiny glasses, transparent glasses, and a slightly shiny, perfectly bald head, with a fantastic Lady Scully artwork behind me, where you can see ostriches fighting and climbing up towards an egg high up in the painting, and it's bright orange with black patterns on. Over to you, Ruth.
Oh, it's me. Okay, hello. I'm Ruth Claxton. I am a white woman. I also have transparent glasses, and I've got grey hair, which apparently is perfect ombre, according to someone who cut it the other week. There you are. That's my claim to fame. And I'm wearing a green cardigan and a stripy top. And also, just to say that if you want subtitles, captions, you should just be able to activate them. They should all be set and ready to roll. And I'm she, her. Okay, go Verity.
Hi, I've got salt and pepper hair, newly bobbed, thick and curly. I'm a white woman with loads of freckles, and I'm sat in my studio in London Fields in Hackney with a backdrop of all kinds of making things, a big table on wheels, things that are work in progress, some paperwork, some columns, some bricks, some rocks.
Yeah, and it looks great as well. Cool. So Verity is working with us as one of the incidental artists and is also Wheatley Fellow with the School of Art and BCU. And we have started investigating things, and we're going to just explore and the stuff that we might have found out so far, or Verity has found out so far. And then perhaps some things that we don't know about the future, and hopefully some interesting bits about the past as well, which all feel really relevant to working here in Birmingham. We thought we were going to start with your prompts, Verity, about places and people and how important that is in your work, I suppose, and also why we wanted to bring you here to Birmingham to find out more, I suppose, about what is happening here in Birmingham and what we can do next and how we can all be part of something, I suppose.
Okay, I'll just talk, and if I don't answer it, just bring me back. So I studied fine art sculpture, and I would still describe my practice as sculptural in ways. Like I make objects, I'm concerned with thinking with like the city of sculpture, moving image, and make film. I do lots of writing as part of my practice. But fundamentally, the glue that brings everything together is place and people. So everything always starts with a place. That's either an invitation to go and work in a place, or responding to a brief in a place, or my studio is a place, like what this is as a kind of site. And quite often, well, very often, these are long-term ways of working, long-term modes of working. And I guess when I think working with place, I describe it as like relationships, developing relationships with that place, but also with people that are there, living, working. Try not to assume, because everywhere's different. I try not to assume anything about anywhere really. Just trying to, I would describe it as lurking, go and kind of hang out, try and get a flavour of what's happening, thinking about, yeah, what potentially I could do in that context without going with an idea of this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, and trying to let that grow out of the relationship building, I suppose.
And you had the added intrigue of returning to Birmingham, and you described it as wanting to get to re-know it, find out what's happening in Birmingham after not living here for a long time. But when
exactly.
When did you leave? When did you leave?
1999, 2000, 1999, yeah. But like I've been coming back regularly ever since. Like my mom still lives there, my brother lives there, he's come back there, my nephew was born there. So I just haven't lived here for a long time. And so I think I described it in my application, like getting to know an old friend in a way, like thinking of the city as this old friend where, you know, yeah, lots of layers of my own personal history, and I suppose my foundations as an artist, like everything that I'm interested in, hanging out on building sites, industrial estates, loads of crap jobs, doing my foundation at Bourneville, but then having this desire, because I lived on the edge of Birmingham for a big chunk, having this desire to kind of leave. Not because of the city, but because of, you know, various personal things and just a need to kind of drive forward. And so it's never anything personal, Birmingham. I needed to fly.
But it's nice to be.
Yeah, it feels amazing to be back. It feels like it's quite weird. It's weird in a really, like, the best meaning of the word weird, because everything is very familiar, but that the last 24 years I've been accessing the city as a visitor, you know, going, you know, like moving through it to see family, hanging out in King's Heath to see my brother, or coming for a day to see an exhibition, or did do a project a long time ago with Muff at Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, but, you know, always as a kind of just coming and then going again. So not really, yeah, having time to sort of like feel the rhythm of what it's actually like. Normally it's like I come and I look and I'm like, Jesus, like, where's that gone? Or, you know, what's happened here? Or this feels different, or thank God that's still there, or, oh, wow, remember when that happened there? So it feels good to actually be here for a while. I don't know how long the while is, because I guess the way that I work as well is I tend to try and slow things down, rather than just rush through a kind of budget and a timetable.
Yeah, which also.
So one thing I realised quite, not recently, but I guess a few years ago, is that the whole thing of working with place for a long time and working like over a few years, you age with that place. So as that place is changing, I'm changing as an artist too. And I found that that's quite interesting, like for me, like working in one London borough for 15 years, working in like one housing estate in Thamesmead for 6 years, like huge things have happened in my life in those times, and they kind of get backdropped by.
Ooh. Is that us that are frozen? I can't tell. Oh,
are you there? Did we just
Yeah, I'm here. I think
did everyone freeze then? I couldn't quite tell. Yeah. We missed about the last 10 seconds, 15 seconds.
Oh, all I said was that's interesting to me, this idea of like kind of like flux and change being a two-way dialogue, like between me and the place and the people I'm working with.
So when you came to Birmingham, like what, I mean, obviously I know kind of, I think it's interesting, like how you start, you know, because Birmingham is massive,
Yeah.
you know, and this huge, you know, it's the second biggest city in the country. It's this huge conurbation with all kinds of diversity in it, but like, you know, so it's, and the brief is super open, we should say. So Verity's here, Verity's working with us, having applied for weekly fellowship, which will come up again in something like June this year, so keep your eyes peeled, you know, and that was a very open brief, essentially, to work with us to develop our project. So, you know, how do you begin? And is it the same wherever you are, or are there different strategies you use?
I guess I have yeah, so I came, like I've been up a few times, and it still feels like I'm starting, but this has been like, I don't know, November, October. Had the interview in August, maybe. No, in June, and then it was like, okay, see ya, everyone's going on holiday. So it feels like it's been going on for ages, but also not. So the starting, I guess how I start, I spend a lot of time thinking, piecing together, a bit like I think like magpie, like these fragments. I might see things and I keep it, and then I came to Birmingham a few times and went on walks. I always do a lot of walks, like walking as practice, as a way to like kind of think about place. So I'm also interested in how the city thins out from the centre. I was interested, like Eastside is right in the centre, well, obviously, but to the east of the centre. So interested about the relationship between Eastside and other parts of the city. So I did quite a few walks through familiar landscapes as well. So I went to the edge of the city, like where the city fits. So I went to Longbridge, where you get the Welcome to Birmingham sign, and I walked back in. I went to like Solihull, did the same, walk from Eastside and walked out that way. So I did a number of these like very long walks and just tried to piece things together. And I put in my application that the things I was interested in was, I'm interested at the moment in like power and who has it, who doesn't, how the artist can be sort of a conduit within communities, not just to take, but to give and to broker, to transfer agency and power, but also thinking about what happens in the erosion of power and when that disappears. So I'm thinking about that all the time I'm walking, and taking photos and fragments. And I think I showed Gavin and Ruth when I saw it. I started just piecing these together, and also then communities. What is a community? In a city the size of Birmingham, you have like communities on communities on communities. So I was thinking about Eastside projects as being one community or a scale, thinking about the School of Art as being another scale of community, the council as being another scale of community, local neighbourhood, ward level being others, and then how could I get dialogue between? Quite interested in the kind of informal and formal power structures and community structures. So I started documenting like buildings. I've worked quite a lot in architecture by accident, just like buildings, teach architecture, teach fine art. So I'm here. And I started documenting the logo. It started forward. And it felt like it was trolling me. It wasn't like this because it was on all these buildings that had been sold and weren't public buildings anymore. And I just kept seeing it kind of winking at me. Then I guess started walking, thinking narrative building, I suppose. And then I go to the archives. I do a lot of archival research to try and trace maybe thoughts that I've had, ideas, things that might have popped up like over the process. So I sat in the archives. So I had a good few days. They're really great. I recommend anyone goes that hasn't been. In the Central Library. And I just started reading things like this, second city politics, democratic processes and decision making in Birmingham. So that's from the 70s. And then I found things like, I'll just read you out some bits that I found, like these little fragments of like, this was a council brochure celebrating, like I think it was the opening of a shopping centre, and there was a appendix at the back that said some of Birmingham's firsts. So all of these things, like this idea of progress and being the first at everything and setting this trend. So it's like we opened the first section of dual carriageway, inaugurated the first one-way traffic system, all of these like first opened its new inner ring road. It built Britain's first post-war dental teaching hospital, which opened in 1964. So all of these archival documents, they're kind of capturing this like the first and this reinvention and like, is this making sense still?
Yeah.
Good. And like I found like sociological documents, like social science that I found amazing. Thinking in 1984, which felt quite prescient because it was 1984 and it's now 2024. About these radical models of decentralisation that were going to get trialled out in Birmingham, of how radical neighbourhood offices could be or could have been, and now neighbourhood offices, the only residue of those are like customer service desks that you get into. I think there's 2 left in Birmingham now. Wow. But this ambition for sort of radicalism within local government and within community I found really, really interesting, and that's I guess what I've been circling around. And how then I just, I've read a lot of these papers where it says Birmingham's been the first for a lot of things, quite pioneering in terms of local government and its architecture, first urban inner ring road, which actually has ended up completely messing the city up. But, like these big stats and being quite tenacious and radical in, so like decentralisation, loads of councils tried it, but just dip their toe in, and really, you know, it was just like performing decentralization in a way, but not actually wanting to have a commitment to really transfer power to the residents. And I think there was this consensus, from what I've read, there was a consensus within the local government at that time to really do it. And I think that's amazing. And then obviously it's well documented all over national news what's happening in Birmingham at the moment. Going bankrupt. Then I was like, God, is this like another example of like the first? Because it feels like the first big domino, the biggest domino to fall, and then there's loads more in its wake. So that's how I start, a combination of like research, kind of walking, and then we went for a walk together and kind of introduce these places and thoughts to people, try and open doors that feel closed and just ask what's happening there, just to try and get an idea of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was quite amazing to see you just like ringing the doorbells and chatting to everyone and getting in there and immediately making great conversations with people and finding new friends. It was like seeing you in your total natural environment. You're just doing stuff. So it was interesting to see that. And because we were walking around bits where we might know a street in Highgate or a building, but we might not know what's behind it or around the corner, or who was, I mean, it's sort of interesting as you were describing all those things and the processes. It was because you mentioned about power before. It's sort of puts everything into that perspective of how you witness the shape of power, the impacts of change and transformation, and I suppose is that why you come back to ideas about regeneration, or to see something fixed up and changed and affected? And
yeah, I think like regeneration is, I've ended up working in regeneration for a really long time, but again, purely by accident. Just, I don't even know how I started. It's happened. I've always been interested in construction, demolition, and change, and just thinking how, as soon as something gets demolished, and like this narrative of placemaking, like places are already made, but there's this constant idea to reinvent. But as soon as something gets demolished, that history, it's still there, but we're constantly trying to like dismiss and do new. So I suppose I've ended up working in regeneration more as like, quite a lot of different ways, like critical friend to council, because I'm able to kind of tell them what not to do and hold them to account a little bit, documenting regeneration, then shaping regeneration. But I suppose I keep coming back to it because I think fundamentally I've seen both ends of the spectrum of how regeneration can be done really, really badly, and how artists can be brought in to completely like manipulate and abuse, and just as lip service and art washing, to the other end of the coin, where if done properly, it can be super empowering, genuinely give power to people who are living through it. And I suppose that's where I kind of want to hang out. I think it's because I'm a citizen as well, right? I'm an artist, but I'm also a person who has various precarious, so I think like a lot of big regeneration programs rely on people just being quiet and doing the bare minimum of,
How easy is it to tread that line of being in the interesting bit where you want to be, but are you being pulled into the other side often, or?
Touching wood, my table here. I haven't actually been pulled into the bad side too much, which is, maybe I'd probably be much richer if I had, but I don't. I think I can just smell. One of the best things I've worked on for a long time in Thamesmead came about because I was invited for an interview to be artist in residence for a certain part of the development. Thamesmead's this huge estate in South East London. Clockwork Orange is filmed there, if anyone doesn't know that. It's one of these places that has a reputation before. People have a reputation, an idea of it at distance, but the experience on the ground is completely different. I knew it because I'd done a project there with Muff years before. And it's amazing, like super complicated. 2 London boroughs straddle it, like GLC, one of the last estates as it was, as the GLC was collapsing. So it's amazing how it tells the story of like governance and government models and kind of ambition, but then also public sector failure all in one place. So I was invited, Peabody took it over as the new landlord, and I was invited to be artist in residence for one part. And I went to the interview, and I remember being in the interview and like just kind of talking myself out of getting it, because I ended up pointing out everything I thought was wrong with the brief. And then I kind of laughed at the end. I was like, oh, I don't think I've got this commission, have I? But anyway, maybe like I'm not the right artist for it. And my issue was that the part that they wanted me to be artist in residence on was about to be demolished. And I thought, well, what's the point? This is just, this is art washing, right? There's no outcome. You want me to be here for this short period of time and then go. And isn't it great? Look how much fun everyone had, and then bye. And their last comment to me was, well, where would you do the residency? And I was like, oh, well, my money's on the moorings, like this other part, stage 3, because nothing's getting demolished. Nothing's getting built. It's just kind of watching it. It's the less cool, less sexy bit of Thamesmead where architects go, they take their pictures, get their photo, but they don't cross the ridgeway. So they never make it there. So it's kind of like a little bit tucked away. And then they came back to me and they're like, we've really taken on board what you've said. And yeah, we'd like to invite you to be. And I said, I want to do something. I don't want to just go and do nothing. Like, I think so they invited me to rewrite the brief and said that they'd cancelled that and they'd moved the residency over to moorings. So that feels like a very good kind of
amazing, yeah. It's brilliant that they actually listened and made that change is fantastic.
Yeah, but I'd also say that's down to people, right? Because that project, the whole moorings, that is a win, Sonia. Thanks for that. But it's also like, I don't know, it's like blind stupidity on the one hand, but I knew in my gut it felt wrong and I'm not the right artist to do that. Loads of other artists could go and do that. I would just end up asking way too many questions. I'd probably get sacked and like I just wouldn't be able to do anything and I'd constantly be trying to ask for more. But it's all down to people. They had like this Kate Batchelor this relationships, right? Kate, she had the confidence to be like, let's listen and we're going to build into this brief that it's a two-way learning for us as a new team, the new Thamesmead regeneration team. She wasn't an arts officer, but she really wanted to embed an artist in the work they were doing. It was before the culture team came about. And it's Kate, that relationship, Kate is now a very dear friend, because that interview was 2016, November 2016. And then I started the residency in 2017. So that interview turns into a residency, which then turned into a funding application by Peabody to reopen a building, which then ended up me being the lead artist on the design team. Which then ends up with, a little plug everyone, a book that I've just made, and it's in conversation with Kate. So we're going to have a big launch for this too. But yeah, and this just tells the kind of story of process, but also what it takes to be an artist working in that way as a case study.
Yeah. Wow. I think you're muted. Yeah.
I know. Lots of artists wouldn't say that in an interview. You know, so I think there's something also there about having a kind of like an ethical position that means that you're very aware of where lines might be in terms of what you're prepared and not prepared to do. And I was just thinking, is that something, I mean, I assume that's something that's developed over time with experience in terms of like a clarity around this is the point, well, you know, and the confidence to say no, which is really interesting in these contexts, because often people feel like they're the little artists with all these big, you know, councils and developers and, you know.
Yeah, I suppose like there is a confidence, but it's not like, yeah, because I wouldn't say I'm like high-fiving people walking down the street with some massive ego at all. I'm actually quite private and not, but I do have sort of a blind confidence in my ethical position in terms of if something feels intuitively wrong or something feels intuitively right, I want to lean into it. If something feels wrong, but there's an opportunity to make it right, that feels fertile. And yeah, we are. And even in those situations, I'm definitely the little person still. But then I think I suppose I feel if I didn't have it, then I'm not going to lose it. If I didn't have it in the first place, then it doesn't matter. Like, it was nice to be invited and have that opportunity. Which is, yeah, like I said before, I would be absolutely loaded if I hadn't been so, if I wasn't so ethical maybe with it. Because I've seen, and I suppose I've seen it because I have been working in this way for quite a long time. I've seen a lot of artists, and I have been treated badly too. Like, I've experienced my fair share of bad practice, and you have to develop like super resilience. And resilience is a word that gets chucked around, like we all want to be resilient, but you have to hold on to this inner core of like what your practice is and why you're doing it, because there's always going to be people that want to take what you're doing and put it into their agenda, or, you know. So another project, the first commission I did, actually first publicly funded commission I did, was in 2007, and I was working for a collaborative art and architecture practice, and we were doing a project in Barking in East London. And I was going there every day on the train. I could see this place, this estate out the window, and I'd met some people from there for the process of working there on this other project. I found out it was being demolished, and I thought that was just quite crazy, like, because it didn't look like there was anything wrong with it. So I made a very, very, very quick proposal, quite impulsively, but that's because I already knew someone at the council from working there on this other project whilst working for a practice. I was able to just be, and again, it's like, you know, I didn't have any professional practice lessons at all, but I was just like, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I was just like, I'd like to make a film and a project about this place. How do I go about it? Can I have some money? And they kind of laughed at me. Were like, well, okay, write a proposal. So I did, and so the regeneration department gave me £5,000. Then the art department gave me £5,000. And then I was like, all right, okay, this is good. And then I went to the Arts Council and I did an application, my first one, for the remainder. Then I got a little bit of match funding from the demolition company because I just asked. I was like, look, and that's when I started to think about this power of this multi-stakeholder kind of funding model. Because I was like, all right, the regeneration department, they're looking at this as kind of a piece of marketing in a way. But I put in my contract, because I wrote my brief, it was like, you will not get editorial control of the film, and all of the oral histories and the interviews will be archived. So, because I kind of knew that would be where the pinch point might be. And I framed it as like, I want to tell the kind of story of demolition. And that's through, so I interviewed like the decanting officer, I interviewed all the residents, and then I followed the rubble through processing. And then I knew the art team were like, we want you to make a really good piece of artwork. The Arts Council were like, we want you to make a really good piece of artwork. The demolition company were like, can you just make sure you don't get any shots of us like not convening to like health and safety. So I kind of knew what everyone was about, but the predominant funder and who was going to be my cheerleader was the Arts Council and the Arts Officer. So I felt quite buoyed by that. And that film, there's nothing I was saying a bit earlier, but there's the most controversial thing about that film, and there's nothing really controversial, is it documents the beginning of kind of financial crash, demolition, and the change to housing policy just by mistake. Because it was 2007, that estate was supposed to get rebuilt upon straight away, and then the financial crash happened, and that sat empty for sort of 3-4 years. I screened the film in the empty footprint of the tower, of one of the towers, and invited like this mixed stakeholder audience. And that kind of opened up this 15-year body of practice, maybe. Wow. 16.
So you were still working, as part of MUF then, but you did that as an independent project.
Exactly, because I was freelance as an artist for MUF 3 days a week. And then yeah, I had my studio and was just developing work, but that was the first time I was like, well, no,
Yeah.
fuck it, I'm gonna try and do my own.
You also talked about that idea of when you applied to come back to Birmingham and to be the Wheatley Fellow, that it was like you just finished a lot of projects. So I guess that's interesting that you can wrap things up. You feel like there's a completion, and what do you do next? How do you move on next, I suppose?
Yeah, I suppose with Barking and Dagenham. So I was artist in residence for that borough, and I had a badge, like a name badge, and that was a badge to help me open buildings and access my camera, but also opened up loads of doors sort of around the world and allowed me to sit in other seats at the table, which has been interesting. Like local authorities always used to have like borough architects, but they never really had borough artists. So I was really interested in that idea. But then it got to the point, because at that time there wasn't a load of artists working there, and it got to the point where it was time, and I was like, I can't really do anything else. A series of things had happened personally. I'd experienced some pretty bad practices, and I needed to detangle and really think about shifting practice, changing context.
Yeah.
I'd already started working on this work between Dagenham and Detroit, which is ongoing, but it was like this. Yeah, I joke like conscious uncoupling, where I was like, I'm leaving. But you don't really leave, because the whole time I've been working in other places, you don't really leave because you've got all these relationships and like these people you've known for years. But I did make a decision to just stop and archive everything and think about what's next. And it was the same time as in Thamesmead, the building that I was lead artist on the design team for, that opened in March 2022. So it was a similar time.
Yeah.
I got a DYCP, and then I applied for a DYCP from the Arts Council to think about this act of reshifting.
Just on that note, I was looking on your website earlier, and it led to the Beacon Tree
empty
project. Yeah, but it was sort of interesting. It had you had a phrase on it, which was that something like you're trying to work out the protecting your intellectual property.
Yeah.
And so is that just unique to that project, or is that something that you feel like?
That is unique to that project, but it is, I guess, the blunt edge of this sweet spot is that, having worked in a place for such a long time, and I do have quite a intensive research practice, like I produce a lot of publications and lots of different things. There's now this very huge body of work that documents change in one London borough, which is very, very, very useful for say anyone that's about to start working there, or like an architect who might start and wants a shortcut to getting some research about the communities they might be working for. And I found that a lot of the work of that project ended up being used as research to other people who'd been commissioned, and that I was thinking. So I'm still thinking like about that, like how. Yeah, it's almost like you have to go, because my practice is so public. You kind of have to let it go, but I want to let it go in a way that I can really. It feels like you're letting a body of art practice go.
That's how that's what I was thinking. It feels like it's like just got to get that right, because it's the sharing of the stories and the insights, and
that's what this book feels. This book feels like that for Thamesmead, because this contains like not just 6 years, but like it contains thoughts and reflections on such a long period of time, and it's just in here now, and that's that. And now it's like, okay, so I can, and the building's there, that there's a thing that exists in the world.
Which must feel quite something, that you're part of that. You're part of that place forever in a way, even if you do go away and you're not there physically as much. It still looks like it's part of you. your
and I suppose that's not even about me. It's more like, God, all those conversations, and like I just worked really hard to make sure that you could get these artworks across the building that are made with members of the community, just so that it becomes a place that to try and help future-proof it, because it's a good news story reopening a former council community centre, like a social club. In an age of everything closing, it felt super positive and like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like if that happened, if we tried to do that now, it wouldn't happen in an era of levelling up.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Like, do you feel like it's the power's shifted now? Like, if you were to start projects like that, do you think you would take the same approach, or would you have to think differently?
Yeah, well, that one, it was also like, because I had this relationship with Kate, you know, my residency was basically saying, like, you've got this sociable club that's closed, it kind of dominates the centre of this place, hoarded up with like black hoarding, just kind of haunting the community, like trolling them and saying, like, here's what you could have had. And it ended up just being like this drinking club, a lot of racism, a lot of antisocial behaviour involved. And I was like, look, just because the social club's closed doesn't mean that there's no social life. We just got to work harder to find it. And actually it's just different, and the social life of a place now will be different in 10 years time, in 20 years time. So the way that we reopen this has to be able to kind of shrink and contract in response to that. So I thought, if you get the foundations right and you make the work right, then you just give it over to the community and allow them to activate it, but without the bar, without everyone getting like pissed every night, and, you know, without membership cards. But I think even just in that small window of time, like Peabody were like, cool, we want to apply. So they applied for funding. They applied for good growth funding, and they put in match funding of theirs, that's £1 million. I just don't think that would happen now, because even in that few years, in this like cost of living crisis, I feel like housing associations they're back to basics. It's more like we just need to repair our buildings. We can't. The facts.
Lucy,
the facts trimmed.
The question asking, which kind of connects, I suppose, whether working as an architect. Well, I suppose what's an interesting way to think about is like the wearing of different hats. Like, you have different hats. You can be more, you know, you understand planning and architecture, and you understand policy, you know, but then you also understand art. So like there's kind of asking whether that's helped you to, whether having built that kind of network of skills, whether that means that it is possible to access funding or write bids, or what different you want, I guess.
I suppose also I'm just a bit of a nerd. Like, I like policy. I like just find it quite interesting, and I always have, like. And also, like, knowledge is power, right? If you're working with people, and going back to one of your comments earlier, like when I was early in my career, I used to sit around meeting tables and you kind of shrink into yourself, because you're not taught at art school like how to grab that seat around the table and assimilate. So, and I've kind of really developed now sort of this understanding that I'm the most mysterious person around the table in a design team meeting. Everybody knows what a quantity surveyor does. Everybody knows what an architect does. They know what a project manager does. No one knows what an artist does. And that's kind of this amazing space of power and potential. So whereas I used to sort of shrink back, now I'm like, well, fuck it. Like, we don't have this professional code that suffocates it. So you can ask questions that the architect would be terrified to ask, or you can say to the architect, well, that sounds stupid. Like, what about this? So it's quite I think it's quite a good thing, but that doesn't mean I'm behaving like an architect. It means that I'm just around the same table as the architect. And I find when working with architects or demolition companies or local authorities, you're kind of drowning in a sea of jargon and assumed knowledge, especially as a woman, where everyone likes to kind of dick swing and remind you that you're a woman in a very gendered profession. And I found that actually knowledge is power, so you can kind of meet them at their jargon and then break the jargon down is a really good thing. like just trying to de-jargon by understanding. Like for me, it became very useful to learn how to read a plan, like to read an architectural plan properly, so that no one could, you know, so that you could keep control over certain things.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I want to sit and draw architectural plans. No. But I want to be able to understand them so that I can you can maintain control over what's happening.
Which I suppose it's Sonia's asked a question around editorial control over the final pieces, how you get people to agree. But I suppose that connects to the same thing, really, that you build the arguments and you make the cases and you use their language and their positions to explain why it's useful and to counter and to do whatever it is you need to do.
And also, if you, this idea of like, you know, my practice is not sensationalist. Don't really like pointing fingers. It's just kind of observing and documenting and then representing, like re-representing, reframing, right? And I think sometimes people think, you know, that might be quite terrifying to a local authority, but you're not, or an art organisation, like, oh God, like, but actually it's not. The politics are much more discreet, and I think that's what makes it much more powerful, because then they become these sort of documents which can be read as art. This double agency, right? They'll be read as artwork, but they're also quite important political tools.
There's a line in that says that has anyone contested when you've put things into contracts? Do they try and change it back, and you have to have arguments? Or
yeah, you have to have like so many, but you have to also like choose your battle. So some things like I can't really say. There's a really great example I can't really talk about because it's still quite fresh, but there's, I suppose it's like, what's going back to this sort of ethical framework, or being really clear, like, what am I prepared to compromise on? And actually, I don't want to compromise too much on the actual practice, but am I going to go to war for one word in a press release, if actually it's just a matter of taste? But I think in terms of the contracts and contested, quite a lot of the time, I don't actually have a contract because I write my own brief. So that's another good thing, but also maybe a bad thing. Quite often as well, like if you're an artist and you're working with an organisation that art practice isn't their business, so say if you're doing, I don't know, just working with a council or an architectural organisation or a demolition company, they'll issue very standard contracts as if you're like a demolition worker. And then you have to go back and talk about things like, or like you're a customer service officer. You have to go back and de-jargon and then add in your own kind of intellectual property and scoping, you know.
Yeah.
The contract for this book was super interesting because it was published by a housing association, right?
Oh, wow.
So we had the back and forth on that, like the artist, the author,
That would be really, I mean, that would be really useful for us at Eastside to look through and compare as well, because we're working on so many different types of public projects. We're always trying to work out the best way to phrase that openness to kind of keep control of what we want to happen and what we want to invest in, and but also to not make it look like we're cutting off the responsibilities and powers of commissioners or other partners or whoever. But it's always that, they always want to own everything, basically. So it's trying to explain that in a way that it's still good for them, and they need to understand that. So, which is always,
I think one of the interesting things to know though is that you can challenge it. You know, and that a contract is just a draft until you've signed it, you know. And so actually, even if you're an individual artist, you do have the power to go, actually, not this bit. If there are bits in it that are just clearly not okay, which often there are.
And I think one thing so I used to have an assistant, right? Quite a long time ago. And I say that, I've said this to my students before as well, like, say if you're a bit nervous, you can just set up an assistant email address and just write the challenging email from that. You know, it's quite a good like one step removed thing. I don't do that anymore. Like I don't actually. I think I did it once when it was something just very annoying and I couldn't be bothered. So we did it from that.
Yeah.
But it's quite good to have this sort of like mythical person, this invisible kind of imaginary person, if you don't feel confident enough to have the conversation, and get somebody else who maybe works in a kind of office environment to write that email. So it's not full of like, oh, apologies. There's nothing more tedious as an artist to feel like we're constantly being told to feel grateful, to have commissions or to be getting paid or to even just be existing. And it's so tedious, all the invisible labor that we actually do, especially with communities, and completely go like, is not captured or recorded. And we're supposed to be like, oh, wow, I'm so grateful. I was given this opportunity and got made to feel terrible for it.
It is crazy.
We've got another question from Madeline, which is asking whether you could talk about how you archive and what form that takes.
Hi, Madeline, friend. Archiving is important. You can probably, I'll see if I can.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Revealing the secrets of my studio. So, yeah, I guess it's a really big thread of my work is archiving and museums and museum contexts. And I guess there's a few different ways that I work with archives or collections. And one is that I'll work in partnership with them. One is that I'll respond to a collection. And then the last is that I'll make my own collection. Like a new, so I've made quite a lot of new collections about places. Who knows, I might end up doing that in Birmingham. But in terms of like material palette, objects, fragments, stories, work. So, and the way that I archive, as it can be film. So we were talking about it earlier, like over the pandemic, I had made this collection for the Becontree project, Living Together. But obviously everyone was at home with lockdown. So I made a series of films and billboards as a way to activate and share the collection. And that feels like that's a form of archive now, as a digital archive. And that all gets archived physically in archives. So that is all now at Barking and Dagenham archive, gets archived in print, all sorts of different ways. I've made a museum.
Is it important? Is like being in the Barking and Dagenham archive an important dimension though, so that there is that kind of residue? You never know what, social clubs open, but who knows what might happen in 10 years time, or the story will be lost, or like institutional memory is lost.
Every project I do in places, I end up archiving it in the local archive. So Greenwich and Bexley has got, I accession it, and then you have interesting conversation with archives. Like, am I archiving it? So say if you have I forgot, like a box, which is, so for Thamesmead, there's like 10 boxes of things. And are they accessioning that as 1,000 pieces, or are they accessioning it as one artwork, as a document of a process? So I like to archive it as an artwork, which is an archive within an archive in a way. So Barking and Dagenham has got so much of my stuff. Each project gets archived. I do think it's important because I think in terms of local history, place, stories, people don't accession to archives anymore. It's only when someone dies that stuff gets archived. So we don't, in a digital age, we don't record or keep in the same way. And I suppose I do think it's important in terms of local knowledge about stuff that's happened. And they're people's voices. Quite a lot of them are like interviews and conversations that ended up, decision-making process of why certain decisions were made. Like, why does your floor look like that in this social club? Because I had these conversations, and that's the process.
It's actually really interesting to think about for like here, because like we've got our archive, but it only sits in this building.
Yeah.
And if like about to be the 10th anniversary of Digworth First Friday, and so Neve the other day was looking through all the events that had happened, and the website that could, like, if someone stops paying it, it will just disappear, and those kind of unofficial histories or you know, like, I don't know, like really important, but not really like DIY histories.
Yeah, but that's what I think.
Never
So
enter those sorts of spaces, do they? Or rarely.
that's what's so important. Like whatever I do for this weekly fellowship, Incidental Artist, I'll archive that. Like that will be a thing. And that's not to be like, oh, my work's the tits. It needs to be archived. It needs to be given a status. But I think as a residue of time and like, especially like barking and dagging stuff, it kind of records not just these art projects, but you piece it together, it's like 15 years of change and relationships to housing, context. It'd be the same with all of your stuff. And I think that as a kind of slice of time and place, super, super important.
Yes, quite well. I just sort of remembering when I went to John Latham's house first, what's now Flat Time House, the whole front room was the APG archive being collated in process, kind of get ready to put into the Tate archive, because he'd realized, you know, quite old age, that he had all this stuff and what's he going to do with it and who's going to look after it in the future. And there was probably, I think there was about 2 other curators who were working on compiling that and putting that all together. So it is it's a thing that doesn't get, I don't hear very often about how people do that or imagine themselves. I mean, maybe you don't imagine you've had a 60-year art career and you suddenly have to put all these things together and make archives, and who's going to look after them forever? Strange things.
I mean, that is terrifying, because as much as everything's like archived, my studio is full to the brim, and I feel like I have a seasonal clear out. I think the reason as well why I archive and it's important is because I use archive so much. There's such an important part of how I start. And I imagine like people in the future, they'll still be curious and wanting to make work about place. If you go to most archives and museums, then it just collecting stops at a certain point. In a session in collections, there's a cliff edge to collections, and that's normally like the 80s, with the age of like digital. People stopped making home videos, stopped taking their 35mm slides on holiday, stopped getting all of your communication from work by letter. It all started to come by email or fax. So there's these massive holes. So that was the Living Together, the Becontree project. The whole driver for that was that it's like, what a stupid idea to celebrate a 100-year anniversary of an estate that is 27,000 houses. And actually, you could argue that places are never complete. So actually, like, to take this centenary as the beginning of the next 100 years and to think about how it's an opportunity to fill in the gaps of recent history in the archives, but working with people to actually make those decisions. And that archive is crazy. Like, there's palm trees that are planted across the estate. There's
there's an archive of the palm trees that documents the palm trees.
Yeah. So at the end point, you know, we documented, photographed every palm tree in Becontree. There's hundreds. But as the end point of that commission, because I had a bit of budget left over, which was supposed to go for a celebration event with the group that I established across the state group. And we were like, oh, we've had loads of events, like we've been meeting every month for years. What should we do with the money? And so I bought every resident in the group a palm tree, and we planted it on a public amenity green that they chose near their house, and had like a celebration, poured a bit of, you know, Prosecco, cut a ribbon, and there's a plaque next to each palm tree. And that was like also the goodbye, the end point.
That's fantastic. I was looking at all the pine trees in Highgate as we were going around, because there are quite a lot dotted here and there, some really attractive ones, very kind of gorgeous, pretty ones dropped in between a lot of much more ordinary looking foliage all over the estate. So
Highgate's is dead interesting, isn't it? Because it's got like, it's so close to the city, but then it feels like really far in points, in the layers and layers of history. Got a massive factory still in the middle, like that brass manufacturers.
Yeah, it's
Loads of
interesting
housing.
contrast to those to the housing estates that are dropped on the edge of Birmingham instead of right in the middle. Like they're similar but also quite different. But there's definitely some, yeah, you lose your place until you suddenly hit one of those hills and see the view right into the city centre, which feels
Yeah.
very odd. That feels
And I think that's why I'm interested in working there, like that similar context of the moorings. It's like, well, this place, it's so close to everything that's happening, but it feels like it's, you know, a lot of this regeneration jargon of like, oh, no one left behind, or it's going to, you know, for the whole of Birmingham. And it feels like you see the line where the money stops getting spent. And I know it is in the plans, it's in like city plans to regenerate, but who knows now, it's gone, there's no money.
No.
So it does feel like it's going to be this observer to a huge amount of change.
Yeah.
Well, and it's what that regeneration would mean for the people who actually live there is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
So it's the same with Ladywood on the other side of town. There's lots of trouble there at the moment with regeneration plans that haven't actually engaged the community at all. Yeah.
It's a tale of
Well,
sorrows.
people get, because that's also sandwiched with new build on one side and then Brindley Place on the other. So very similar in some ways to Highgate with all these new flats that are being built on the side of the Ring Road and then the Smithfield stuff. It's like they're two quite similar, yeah, little oases of, you know, community that is at risk, I suppose, potentially, hopefully not, but potentially.
And so
Yeah,
I think
It's always...
I think we're leaving everyone on this cliffhanger teaser now because
Yeah.
we're sort of running out of time, which is sort of a nice watch this space because it feels like there's so much still to explore. We still don't know where you take us. So
No, I've got ideas, you know, like spaces and faces and yeah, but it's early days, it's emerging, but I think it will emerge soon.
Yeah, absolutely. But we should wrap up exactly on time with seconds left to spare. Yeah, thanks so much, Verity. Real insight.
Oh, thank you.
All the technicalities, and the only thing we didn't show, maybe just end showing that the relationship image, because I think that's quite a nice contrast and perhaps some of the technical and formal and engagement processes of language and bureaucracy, and then you've actually got hanging out with people and what person leads you to the next and all of those things.
So I'll probably do one for Birmingham. I make relationship diagrams for most of my projects, but this is a huge one I did for Thamesmead, which you get in the back of the book.
It's a folder in the book.
1.2 meters long.
Nice. Zoom in a little bit more. Can it zoom in?
So just the idea that it starts with like this Coraline Walk artist in residence interview, 13th of April 2016. And then you end up, so the colour code, it's like people, groups that I've set up, groups that I've become a member of, and how one thing's led into another. Yeah, it's pretty intense.
And how long is this across time? Not literally.
So it starts, let's go to the top.
That's 21.
2016 is the first
wow.
interview when I was taught myself out. Then I was commissioned December 2016. Then I established a community press as part of the residency. And that photo that you used for the of me in front of the hoarding, that was the end point of the residency in the beginning of the building. Like the change of role from being arts in residence on the design team.
When's that?
This goes up
21? 21? 22?
That was 2018, the hoarding went up.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. 2019 maybe. No, 2021 it went up because we had to do it in the pandemic, 2020. Governance workshops, boring, but actually really fun. Like I said, I like that stuff. And 2022, it opened.
Practical
and this
completion.
Is a joke, isn't it? Book production due to launch in autumn 2022, but it's for various legal reasons, which is a whole other talk. It was it's been in a box here for a year. But it's now free to see the world.
Great.
And you see the key at the back, which is
A relationship map of an artist. That's nice. And the moorings. Lovely.
And you can see.
Great. Nice finale.
There you go. It's all about people.
Yeah, definitely.
Basically. Conversations, overhearing, you know.
Cool. Well, thanks. I'm sure there's going to be lots more. We don't know when or where and how yet, but things will be emerging over time. And hopefully let's do some in real life meetings we invite audiences and come in and have chat conversations as well. So we'll be doing that soon. So thank you very much to Verity. Thanks all for coming. What else do we need any info about any other things, Ruth, off the top of your head?
It's just loads of things happening. Obviously I can't remember dates because I'm a 52-year-old woman and that is no longer possible, but there's if you're an EOP person, there's EOP meeting us. So Lucy and Neve are going to interview me and Gavin. That's coming up, and they have got some questions.
Yeah, we're gonna
some questions already.
It's gonna be highly pressurized for us. It's gonna be tricky, you know.
If you're an opera fan, we've accidentally gained an opera season, so we've got 2 operas coming up that we're hosting. So that's good. Duplicate Publishing Fair. If you're into self-publishing, that's calling out for applicants. And also, if you're an EOP person, Emma Hart wants to fall back in love with art with you again. So that's all on the website now about going and just seeing exhibitions and talking about them is essentially that project. So yeah, a bunch of things. But yeah, otherwise we'll see you soon at something, hopefully.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks everyone then.
Bye.